Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce's 2021 annual meeting. I'm your Master of Ceremonies today, Kim Kerrigan from Bloomberg Radio, and I am thrilled to be here with you. I only wish that we could all be together, and hopefully that will be sometime soon. But until then, let's make the most of this afternoon by using the chat and the other functions that you see there on your screen. There's a lot to dive into, so let's get right into our theme, which is recovery, renewal, and renaissance. Now, there's no two ways about it that here in the greater Boston area, we're ready to welcome a new bold renaissance, a rebirth, and a new economy that creates and amplifies all voices and all businesses and all communities. Performing in Emerson College's beautiful Cutler Majestic Theater, please welcome Boston Poet Laureate and 2019 Chamber 10 Outstanding Young Leader, Portia Olaiwala.
I do not desire a new country. Instead, let us build ourselves the one promise. We will not twine it in rhetoric meant to temper the heart and yet does nothing to settle the gut. We will not hand it a flag and yet dress it in gun. We will not declare it free if breath costs us our living. I do not demand a new Commonwealth, only a nation in which a child does not lose a parent to a border. A city where a lover does not lose love to the law. Give us a schoolhouse filled with voices and unscreamed, a hospice housing a cure, undercorn with disease. I do not wish for a new earth, just that we unconquer the planet we are on, solely that we unown a land we do not honor. I do not harbor for fame nor wealth, hundreds of acres, nor livestock, nor mule. Simply allot me my life. Skittles to dance the tongue, water to sate the fields, the gods, the thirst of the throat, a soft slumber and a holy, holus rise in the morning. This morning here, a rising dawn, a dawning dream, a past and present bursting crimson and a future clean. Gaping wide and willing to cradle each of our names between its cheeks, here we stand at a cusp, precipice of possibility, asking ourselves, how might we flare in the thick of this fog? Are we as brave as our home is free? I do not pray for a different country, nor different countrymen, just that we grant dominion in each life, the right to a pursuit of our joy, a meal steaming warm at the table each night, a passion of labor to tend to each day, a law honest and just, true as a declaration, gallant governance, wise and selfless, a people in good health, well and well-fared, a wealth of love, architecturing a legacy of grit and gleam, an endless ballad, a swelling dream, song at the end of morning, morning on the break of horizon, horizon, a whole country, a whole nation humming out a renaissance. Recovery, renewal, renaissance.
Thank you for grounding and uplifting us, Portia. Now it's time to turn it over to our annual meeting co-chairs. Let me introduce you to Roxanne Cook. Roxanne is the Consumer Bank Regional Director for J.P. Morgan Chase, and Michael Carson. He is the president of the combined organization of Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan.
Hello and welcome everyone. Roxanne and I are thrilled to be with you, albeit virtually again, for the Boston business community's biggest and most important event of the year. We'd like to start by thanking our presenting sponsors for making this celebration possible. Thank you, Bloomberg, State Street, and Suffolk, as well as our many platinum sponsors.
We'd also like to thank our fellow annual meeting host committee members for their support during another challenging year for businesses and people. Michael and I have seen persistence and empathy across industries, and that gives us great hope.
Absolutely, Roxanne. It's a privilege to be able to stop for a moment with not only the host committee, but nearly 2,000 members of our community to celebrate leaders like Paul, Melvin, and Kate, and all the businesses and people who have put considerable thought into creating a great future for our region.
Michael and I are excited about this afternoon's lineup, so let's get started.
Thank you, Roxanne and Michael. And now I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Alicia Alaimo. Alicia is president of Biogen US organization.
Thank you. I am honored to introduce the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker. We are fortunate to have him join us each year and to have such strong leadership from his administration. He has been a champion of the life sciences ecosystem, of which Biogen has been proud to be a founding member of nearly 40 years ago. This year, in particular, we are humbled that his commitment to making the Commonwealth a scientific leader helped generate breakthrough innovations to fight the global pandemic. Please join me in welcoming Governor Baker.
Good evening, everybody. This is Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, and on behalf of the Commonwealth, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce's 2021 annual meeting. For the second year in a row, I know we're all disappointed we can't be together in person for this important gathering of our local business community. But tonight, I'm still glad to have this opportunity to offer my thanks for your continued partnership this year more than ever as we continue to navigate the pandemic and work toward a strong recovery. Now, a few months ago, I was pleased to address the Chamber and provide my annual update on our efforts to build a better Commonwealth. That was an interesting event because it was virtual, like this one. And I commented at the time about how much I miss those interpersonal interactions, the chit-chat, the small talk that typically comes with gatherings of this sort. I learn a lot from those conversations, and I'm sure many of us would agree that it is a part of how we create a sense of community around here. I really do hope at some point in the not too distant future we'll be able to get back to that sort of thing. But in the meantime, the Greater Boston Chamber and its members have been key partners to our administration since we entered office, working closely with us on issues ranging from transportation to housing to workforce development. And of course, throughout the pandemic, the Chamber has been a key voice for the employer community as we update guidelines and safety protocols and tailor support to businesses and their employees. Like you, we've been laser focused on helping businesses, especially small businesses, weather this crisis and sustain a recovery. We stood up the largest program of its kind, grant program of its kind for small businesses here in the Commonwealth, $720 million, and a big chunk of it went to businesses in Boston. And we also managed, through the work that was done by the Mass Growth Capital Corporation, to make sure that a lot of those grants went to businesses that were owned and operated by people of color, in communities of color, by women owned businesses as well, and also in many cases by veteran-owned businesses and businesses that were supported and operated and owned by the LGBTQ community. We're also working to support downtowns and main streets through programs like the Shared Streets program and My Local MA campaign, and have launched an initiative to study the future of work in a post-pandemic world and the implications that will have for Massachusetts and many of our cities and towns to better inform us all as we think about economic development, childcare, transportation, and a host of other issues going forward. I'm very grateful to President and CEO Jim Rooney for his leadership of the Chamber, and to every member for your partnership and your resilience during this enormously challenging time. I also want to take a moment to recognize tonight's inductees into the Academy of Distinguished Bostonians, Paul Grogan, Mel Miller, and Kate Walsh. I've known all three of those folks for a very long time, and they have in fact been terrific assets to the Commonwealth and to the city of Boston and to the community for many years. I want to extend my personal congratulations to each of you on this well-deserved honor, and the only thing I would really say about it to the Chamber is, what took you so long? Tonight, I hope you all enjoy this chance to connect with colleagues and discuss the road ahead for Boston and for our Commonwealth. And despite the unprecedented challenges that we face, I'm hopeful that brighter days are right around the corner, especially as we get everybody vaccinated, and hopefully be able to bring back some normalcy, especially to our kids when it comes to school and work. In the months to come, I look forward to continuing partnership with the Boston Chamber as we work toward getting through and to the other side of COVID and the beginning of what I hope will be a robust recovery. In that spirit of collaborative and innovation, which I think defines our Commonwealth, I'm confident we can rebuild from the pandemic and be stronger than ever. Thank you very much for this chance to speak, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Governor Baker. Suffolk is honored to be a presenting sponsor of this year's annual meeting. I am pleased to help induct the first honoree into the Academy of Distinguished Bostonians this afternoon. Kate Walsh is a leader who has kept equity at the forefront of our region's recovery. I am honored to call her a friend, and we are lucky to have her leading one of our institutions in healthcare that is so important to our city. Congratulations, Kate.
Kate is passionate.
Kate is a mission-driven leader.
Equitable care is her highest priority.
I think my responsibility as a leader is to be really intentional about calling out racial health inequities. And I think that our future as a health system is based on our ability to not only address but eliminate those disparities.
Kate understands the unique role that Boston Medical Center plays, serving a population of every race and creed and language and culture.
BMC was ahead of the game when it comes to issues of social determinants of health. They can identify whether there are concerns with housing or food insecurity and provide access to resources and services.
I think BMC's community focus is probably best demonstrated by the very strong relationship we have with 14 health centers across the city. People get the care they need close to home in their neighborhoods.
When we're not able to care for patients in our community, BMC is able to provide inpatient care and specialty care for them.
During COVID, we all depended on each other to learn from each other's experiences, to share resources.
It was really the proudest moment of my career to lead this organization through this pandemic because the team here performed beautifully. To see people come into work, do whatever was required, risking their own life, and every day they came back with ways to do that better.
Kate's a very engaged leader. She knows her way around the BMC campus. She is very open to hearing what's working and what's not working. She's really worked to raise the profile of BMC to a high-performing academic medical center.
Kate's commitment to the community is in so many different forms. She served on many boards, the Pine Street Inn and the Boston Public Health Commission, the Massachusetts Hospital Association.
And as we look to recover from the pandemic, it's really going to be partnerships. It's not something that can be done alone, and it's going to require a leader like Kate that values and recognizes the importance of partners.
Kate Walsh is a woman for all seasons, pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID. She is a woman who learns, who constantly looks for new ideas to recover.
As I think about recovery and renaissance, I like Boston's chances. The business leaders and community in this region have staunchly supported everybody in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts' right to high-quality healthcare. That's fundamental to our ability to return to work and thrive as a society, as an economy, and having the bright future I know we can have.
So well deserved. Congratulations, Kate. To keep things moving, let me introduce Ron O'Hanley. He is the chairman and CEO of State Street, and Yvonne Garcia. She is chief of staff to the chairman and CEO and head of global communications for State Street. And she is also the chair of the Chamber's Women's Network.
Thank you, Kim. On behalf of all of State Street, we are honored to introduce the 55th mayor of Boston, Kim Janey.
Mayor Janey made history as the city's first woman and first Black mayor. As the chair of the Greater Boston Chamber's Women's Network and a proud member of the Latinx community, I am encouraged by the diversity that Mayor Janey brings to the city. This diversity of thought and experience is crucial as the problems facing our city require new ways of thinking.
Impressively, Mayor Janey is tackling these challenges head-on. She is leading Boston through the pandemic with a citywide agenda for recovery, reopening, and renewal. I personally cannot wait to see all that her administration accomplishes and the history she will continue to make.
Welcome, Mayor Janey.
Greetings, I'm Mayor Kim Janey. It is my pleasure to join you virtually for the 2021 Boston Chamber of Commerce Annual Meeting. As your new mayor, I'm looking forward to working with you to make our city more equitable and vibrant as we come through the pandemic together. I'm committed to helping our business community recover, reopen, and renew. I've hit the ground running with investments like the All-Inclusive Boston campaign to highlight tourism and hospitality, and the Boston Contracting Opportunity Fund to help small businesses build capacity for city contracts. Working together with you, we will do even more in the months and years ahead. I want to congratulate this year's honorees, Kate, Melvin, and Paul. You make our city proud. It is now my honor to induct Melvin B. Miller, publisher and chief editor of the Bay State Banner, into the Academy of Distinguished Bostonians. Founded by Melvin to empower Black voices, the Bay State Banner is New England's longest-running African-American newspaper. Congratulations again, Mel.
Mel is a Renaissance man.
Mel Miller is determined.
No one will fight harder for equity in this region.
I'm not what you'd call a well-liked guy. There are lots of decisions to be made that are tough decisions, and somebody's got to speak up.
Mel started the Banner in the 60s, during the height of the Civil Rights Movement.
The primary motivation has been to provide information and strategies for the Blacks to improve their status. Also, we wanted to rebut disinformation that was generally provided by the major media.
He came out with his first headline, "What's Wrong with Our Schools?" and looked at the segregation of the schools, but also found ways to help in the schools. He's shined a light on inequities in healthcare.
We saw a health report that Blacks weren't getting the examinations and going through the health processes that were available. We started a program called Be Healthy Magazine.
What he did was raise awareness about the kinds of health issues that impact communities of color.
The secret that we know how to do is we know how to present it in a way that will generate enthusiasm, confidence, and support.
The Banner is a mirror for the Black community. It's an opportunity to see ourselves validated.
At 86 years old, you'll still see him coming into the office, writing editorials that, quite frankly, sometimes make people uncomfortable, but yet at the same time, he always holds himself to the same standard.
The Bay State Banner stands among a legion of Black newspapers across the country. Many of these papers have experienced financial difficulties over the years. The Bay State Banner has remained strong.
Now we're in a position for the Banner to be an extraordinary marketing tool, to begin to make extraordinary shifts in the Black community.
Mel is known for speaking truth to power. As we come out of this pandemic, I think it's going to be more important than ever to have somebody like a Mel Miller who's not afraid to point out to the powers that be that Boston has to do better.
I have great faith that Mel Miller will continue to serve and that the Banner will continue to thrive.
We're going to have to really find a way where we can all develop a brotherhood and sisterhood of all the different ethnicities so that we work together with great comfort and ease. We've gone through an awful period, and as the new president has said, now we have to build back better.
Congratulations, Melvin. As a fellow journalist, I'm in awe of your contributions. Let's turn the virtual floor over now to a former distinguished Bostonian, Micho Spring. Micho is chairman of Weber Shandwick Global Corporate Practice and New England president. Micho is also the chair of the Chamber's Board of Directors. Micho, welcome.
Thank you, Kim. I assumed this role a year ago at a time of great upheaval, uncertainty, and urgency, committed to reimagining and rebuilding a more equitable and inclusive economy. And we're more committed than ever to continue that journey. We meet a year later with more hope and optimism, embracing change and opportunity to continue together to make progress. We welcomed our first female and Black mayor in Kim Janey, who has made history and proven that change and progress are possible. And we honor 3 exceptional Bostonians who have been warriors for justice and equity throughout their careers. Mel Miller, an exceptional journalist and tireless champion for our Black community and for a more inclusive Boston. Kate Walsh, a tenacious advocate for the underserved who has done heroic work, particularly in this pandemic. And Paul Grogan, whose vision and leadership has had a transformative impact on Boston. With the uncertainty and challenges of 2020 came a new belief and trust in business, the highest in our history. Now it's our responsibility to seize that opportunity and our responsibility to our communities and stakeholders to do more and to do better. My fellow board members and I are committed to using the Chamber's influence to lead. We're actively and intentionally building a board that reflects our full diversity in the state. We have begun, but work remains. Since 2016, women on our board increased from 23% to 40%, and people of color increased from 12% to 20%. Over the next 5 years, we will work towards a board that is 50% women, 17% Black, 10% Asian, and 10% Latinx. We want our board to reflect not the Boston we are, but the Boston we aspire to be. Today, this Chamber's task is to earn the trust placed in business by using it to build not simply an inclusive organization, but an inclusive economy, not just sustainable companies, but a sustainable community, not just prosperous businesses, but a prosperous greater Boston. Thank you for joining us in this transformational and important work. Now I'm deeply honored to induct Paul Grogan of the Boston Foundation into the Academy of Distinguished Bostonians. Paul and I started our careers together at City Hall, and I have seen firsthand his unparalleled commitment to building a better and more equitable Boston for over 4 decades. Paul's vision, ability to build broad consensus, and deliver tangible results have greatly benefited all of us in this city and will be felt for generations to come. It is a personal privilege for me to introduce his tribute.
He's a visionary leader, way ahead of his time.
Paul's strategic vision is born of curiosity. That light in his eye, the excitement in his voice, and the smile that says, "Why, what interesting possibilities."
He's not afraid to fail. Paul will take on the powers that be.
I started my career in government right here in Boston as an aide to then Mayor Kevin White. And I had a job that exposed me to the city, all that is good about it and all that is problematic. And I just fell in love with the whole struggle to save Boston and save cities and make them be what they could be.
He and the foundation have acted over the last 20 years as a catalyst to bring together the businesses, the arts organizations, the education organizations, the communities, the various ethnic groups. They were all very separate, but Paul and the foundation have really made a difference in getting us to work together.
That's what good leaders do. They don't just hang on to one vision that's static. He can see how that vision will change over time, and he brings along the rest of us.
Boston Foundation does terrific research, and we bring people together to consider the implications of that research. And out of that comes ideas for initiatives and a real collaborative spirit in Boston, which is really the only way we're going to solve the very tough problems that we have.
I can speak firsthand about the Success Boston initiative, designed to lift high school students into college and ensuring a supportive transition and yielding higher college completion.
The high school kids in Boston get assigned a coach their senior year of high school and through their first couple of years of college. To have that kind of personal resource that parents provide that function in middle-class families. A lot of our kids are from single-parent households, and they need our assistance to get them through that critical hurdle.
I think he's one of the few people I know who understands that the payoff is the process, and the payoff is living the sense of community and the sense of giving.
There was no insulating oneself from the pandemic. We put together very, very quickly a relief fund of $19 million over and above, and we believe that quick injection saved a whole bunch of organizations that would have gone out of business.
Boston Foundation is the gold standard by which other community foundations benchmark their successes.
He is truly responsible in a major way for the renewal that's taken place in bringing the cities together.
I do believe that Paul's leadership pushed us to think about Boston in a larger context.
We have to rededicate ourselves to an unstinting effort to extend the opportunity that's available to some in Boston to all. The business leadership is going to be crucial to addressing that. It's the spirit of Boston, it's the can-do view, it's that people actually want to get things done and solve problems. This could be the opportunity capital of the United States.
Congratulations, Paul, and thank you so much. Now to reflect on what this moment means to the region, to businesses, and to people, let's welcome Chamber President and CEO Jim Rooney.
Thank you. This past year has changed us. We've seen grit, determination, and empathy all emerge as we battled against the pain and sacrifice caused by the pandemic. The ongoing battle against racism has demanded more of us as friends, neighbors, co-workers, and business leaders. We continue to see companies and all of you embracing actions to create equity and champion economic opportunity, meeting the calls for change. As I watched Amanda Gorman recite her powerful poem at the presidential inauguration this year, I was particularly struck by these words. Somehow we have weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. As we move forward, let's examine the imperfections in our systems that has resulted in so many widening gaps. Let's move forward together with an urgency to build an equitable and inclusive economy. This moment has the potential to be the turning point that defines our region for years to come. Let's embrace our responsibility as a business community to finish the work of building a nation and an economy for all. We take great inspiration from the 3 leaders we've inducted into the Academy of Distinguished Bostonians. Kate Walsh has led our recovery. Paul Grogan has inspired the region's renewal. And Melvin Miller has laid the groundwork for a bold renaissance. Kate, Paul, Mel, congratulations and thank you. As we honor and reflect upon your contributions to our community, we see the type of leadership we all need to embrace in this moment. Together, we shape our renewal, our recovery, and our renaissance. As we think about the future of our region and urban centers, I'm pleased to welcome our featured speaker, Bashan Chakrabarti, an architect, urbanist, educator, and author. Bashan believes that cities, if they are designed to be sustainable, equitable, and joyous, are the last and best hope for humanity. Bashan, thank you for being with us.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bashan. And I know that we've already introduced you and that our guests today have your bio, but I feel compelled to add a little bit more. I know you missed the Boston accent, so I'm sure you'll enjoy this conversation. And I wanted to share with our guests your props, having grown up in Arlington, an internship in bus operations with the T, and engaging in some planning in Boston around the Fort Point Channel, and I know other places. So in addition to all your work as a champion of cities, you have an intimate knowledge of Boston and this region too. So let's talk a little bit about that. We're, of course, at a moment in society when cities like Boston are dealing with pandemic recovery, health crisis, economic crisis, but of course layered on top of of climate change and a racial reckoning. As I said, you've been a champion of cities and the benefits of an urban America. You speak about it, you talk about it. So let's talk about this moment. And I want to start with the issue of density. After 9/11, you were asked to become the planning director for Manhattan. And back then, the density of cities was called into question. Now, as we come out of this pandemic recovery, the density of cities is again part of the narrative. So is your belief in cities and the density thereof, reinforced, or is it waning? How are you thinking about city centers and urban populations?
My belief in density is absolutely unshaken, Jim. All you have to do is look at pandemics in past history, and cities have always recovered from them. And that's because as a species, we're just a naturally social species, and we need to interact. I mean, this pandemic actually has made us all miss each other, frankly. I mean, it's interesting as we come out of it, how much we're rushing to be in communal circumstances again. And, what's interesting is there's data that's starting to come out from C.B. Richard Ellis about the fact that, the out-migration story from cities is much more complicated than we first thought, in the sense that there has been significant out-migration from our most expensive cities, San Francisco, New York, Boston, Washington. There's been, with San Francisco actually being the highest on a percentage basis. But there's actually a lot of in-migration into smaller cities that are more affordable, have high quality of life. And so I think for those expensive cities that are starting to lose a bit of population, if it wants to regain that population, Boston included, focusing on quality of life, affordability, equity. My new mantra is jobs, justice, and joy. That if a city figures out those three things, right, it will attract the human capital that it wants to attract.
Jobs, justice, and joy. Well, I'm sure we'll be coming back to that. I like it. You raised the issue of as cities think about coming out of this pandemic, and here in Boston we talk about building back better, and I'm sure all over the country there's these phrases like the new normal and what that's going to be like, and whether or not people are going to return to their office buildings or if they want more space and so forth. But there's a number of factors. You raised the issue of out-migration in certain high-cost cities that I want to come back to. But let's focus on equity for a minute and the challenge that has been exacerbated over the past year. A number of gaps highlighted during the pandemic: wealth gaps, education gaps, healthcare gaps, a number of gaps. So, talk about cities and whether or not they have a greater capacity to deal with such issues, or are these big national issues, or do they really get solved on a local level? And do we need to embed our path forward with solutions to these problems as well?
Jim, I think it's really a partnership between the federal and the local. There's certain things. So, for instance, when we see different cities adopt minimum wage hikes and so forth, and I'm all for increasing the minimum wage, but I really think it's much better to have a national minimum wage, and maybe there's some exceptions for West Virginia for some of our swing senators. But the point is that you get into a kind of brutal competition amongst cities unless you have national policy around certain things. Same thing with social housing investment, which I think the federal government has to take up again, that we have not had really since the 1980s. And we've seen this precipitous nationwide drop in affordable housing in our cities. And so At the same time, I think cities can adopt really smart policies like Anne Hidalgo in Paris and what she's doing with taking away private automobiles. In Berlin in the 1980s, we saw this huge infusion of social housing that was built with great architecture and public space. So I think cities can do a lot locally, but it really needs that partnership at the federal level, because otherwise you have this kind of race to the bottom situation that you saw with the Amazon competition and other things when cities, try to construct local policies that actually create a lot of other inequities. So I do think you need that partnership.
Yeah, I agree with Sean in the partnership concept. When you think about some of these inequities and gaps, whether it's education or access and healthcare outcomes and the like, and housing you brought up. The partnership with the federal government, particularly in terms of resources, is important, but the work really gets done in cities.
Yes, it does. And mayors are extraordinarily powerful. And many people have commented on the fact that, mayors, if we're going to fix climate change, it will probably happen at the mayoral level around the world before it happens at the national government level. So there's a tremendous amount that cities can do. And I think that, going back to jobs, justice, and joy, part of in the justice column is climate, because climate is a social justice issue. And so I just think there is so much that cities can do to not just do this because it's the right thing to do, but because the people who are looking to say, I want to move to Boston versus another city, they're taking stock of whether cities have smart policies in terms of equity and ecology and so forth.
Yeah. You mentioned the recent trends about certain cities, Boston, San Francisco, having some level of outmigration. One of the factors, of course, is cost, the cost of living, cost of housing. I mentioned in the introduction that, you're familiar with Boston.
Yeah.
We're driven by knowledge-based, white-collar, white-coat industries. Our competitive advantage is talent. Now we're in a phase, given the pandemic, that there's this work-from-anywhere culture. You can get your talent any place. Are these trends threatening cities like Boston as you look down the road? And what are the kinds of things that a city that does depend on competitive talent for competitiveness and at a high cost need to be thinking about?
Well, I think it's both threat and opportunity. It's threat if you adopt the wrong policies. It's opportunity if you adopt the right policies. And again, they center on these questions of equity and ecology. And I'll be very upfront about this, and I speak about it often. I mean, I grew up in Arlington. It's called Arlington now, apparently. And it was a really tough place to grow up as a brown kid. And I grew up when the decisions were made about stopping the red line at Alewife. I mean, let's think about why the red line stops in the middle of a wetland in Cambridge instead of extending to Arlington and Lexington. There were a lot of racial politics associated with that decision. And those are the things that young people notice. Boston has a tough racial history, and it needs to be more upfront about it, frankly. And it needs to reconcile it. And I don't just mean, the stereotypes of people from Southie or whatever. I also mean even in white progressive politics in Boston. And it's great to see that there's a lot more diversity coming into political leadership now, and people are running for office and so forth. But that is part of it, as well as these policies around, other things like jobs and sustainability. Because again, I'm around young people all the time in terms of students and my own staff in New York, and they are watching what we all do. And they will make decisions about where they want to live based on the honesty of those conversations and based on, kind of the intelligence of the policies that cities adopt. So again, I think it's threat or opportunity based on what you do.
Yeah, I want to expand on something you raised, which is the perception of Boston. I mean, because we are competing for talent, and we're blessed with all the colleges and universities that give us a head start, if you will, in that regard. But we do compete to get people to come here to want to seek their jobs, their justice, and their joy, and their careers here in Boston. Tell us, as a person who lived here, now as a person who's spent considerable time on the West Coast, what are people's thoughts about Boston?
I think people, well, it depends on who you ask, obviously, but I think, look, everyone understands that Boston is a powerhouse in terms of, obviously, Harvard, MIT, BU, BC, all the universities. And especially, my father was part of the research industrial complex in Boston, was working for an affiliate of Mass General. And yet, and I think everyone respects that. At the same time, there is this sense that it's a small town. And there's certain really nice things about small towns, right? There's a sense that there's a kind of identity. But at the same time, again, I've talked to a lot of people of color who've had a lot of tough experiences in Boston. And you see it in the beginning of Good Will Hunting, right? Where a bunch of guys get out of a car and they just beat the crap out of someone for no apparent reason. And there's that still lies under the surface. And I think some of that stereotype, and maybe it's changed over the years, but some of it is still there. And I think that it's really important to have those conversations, because part of it's also the geography of Boston to me fascinates me, right? And so even just by the colors of the T lines, you can isolate very specific racial and demographic groups, right? I'll never forget as a teenager, going into Boston and noticing the immediate demographic switch when you got on the orange line, right? And those things signal inequities and so forth. And again, I'm sure a lot has changed since I was a kid, but I think some of those perceptions are still out there. And I think it's important for people to understand that if there is a new Boston, that should really, that welcomes everyone, that should be something that's really celebrated and talked about.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, sort of two challenges that could be opportunities here, right? This issue of how welcome we are as a city, along with this issue of how do we meet the challenges of being a high-priced city, but one that has a lot going for it at the same time. And to that point, I want to explore joy a little bit, which I'm assuming means quality of life in some ways. And, talk about what you're seeing around the U.S., around the world, in terms of how people are creating within densely populated urban cities a higher level of quality of life, or something sort of different and interesting that contributes to joy.
Sure. And, one of the big things that's going on globally is the questioning of the private automobile in cities. And now, obviously, you still need freight delivery, you need ways for the disabled to move around, you need buses, you need, taxi services. But a lot of cities, Paris being the leader, but there are cities in Latin America, where we're starting to see governments say, if we want our city to grow, we can't commit our streets, which for most cities is about 30% of the real estate in the city, to these huge things that we call private cars. You want to go drive out in the country? Fine. That's of course your right. But you don't have a right to just drive these mammoth vehicles into the city, limited number of lanes, limited amount of parking lots. I mean, the roadway infrastructure for cars, parking lots are affordable housing sites. Parking spaces are places that you can use for everything from small parklets to places where, to deliver homeless services, to deliver, much buses, which are a very good, flexible form of mass transit, are only slow because they compete with private vehicles for the roads. And so we've seen across Latin America, in Bogota, in Curitiba, Bus Rapid Transit, dedicated, like truly dedicated bus lanes, not just some green paint, but truly dedicated bus lanes, where buses can suddenly move at subway speeds because they're in their own lane. And there's ways to get people on and off them quicker. They serve the disabled very well if they're designed properly. It's those things. And now, of course, buses, there's zero emission technology. And, electric buses are great because you can charge them at night and so forth. They're fleet vehicles. So it's those things that actually are not that expensive. I don't think our cities are prepared to build billions of dollars worth of new subway line. But you can deploy rubber tire technology really easily, but you have to give it the dedicated rights of way. That is a quality of life issue. Obviously, parks and public space, as an architect, I've worked on public space all my life, and I think it's really important to create equitable public spaces that are, Olmsted did the Emerald Necklace in Boston, and Olmsted wrote about the social condenser aspect, the idea that in a park, people from all walks of life could come together. Critically important in terms of joy and quality of life. And then obviously just affordable housing investment. You can't have joy if you're rent burdened. If you are constantly under the stress of whether you can afford your rent, there's no way you can have a higher quality of life. And I think this is the piece that we miss today. If the person sitting next to you isn't rent burdened, but senses that you are, that impacts their quality of life. That's what's really different about this younger generation. It's not just whether they're secure in their lives. They want to know that everyone else is secure in their lives. And that's a high bar, but it's a very gracious kind of communal social bar. It's not just whether me and my family are okay. And that, I think, is something that decision makers need to understand, because that's the way I think younger people think about the world today.
That's great. Vashon, our time has gone by far too quickly here. And I have one final question, and some of the answer I know has been embedded in our conversation already, but we have an interim mayor. We're talking about coming out, like all cities, coming out of this pandemic, building back better, trying to define what is the new Boston. Your message to the new mayor of Boston, whoever he or she might be in the fall, along with the business community leadership that are listening in today, in terms of creating that new Boston, what should be the priorities going forward?
Jobs, justice, and joy. I mean, it's all right. Come on. It used to be mayors and politicians ran on jobs, 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 right? And that's what, like the Chamber of Commerce, that was the jobs, jobs, jobs. And everyone wants a job. That's obviously critical, right? But without justice and joy, cities are not going to compete. I mean, it's really that simple. And the thing is, Boston's really good at the jobs part. It's really, really good at it, right? And it's pretty good at the joy part. I mean, Boston's a beautiful city, but the problem is the beauty isn't very equitably distributed. The beauty sort of tends to belong to the wealthier parts of Boston. And that's something that you really need to think about in terms of those last two things. So I hate to be repetitive, but it's a kind of, it's kind of an easy mantra to talk about a very difficult thing to achieve.
Well, Vashon Chakrabarti, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time. I think we've just learned the title of your next book, in Jobs, Justice, and Joy. It's been a great conversation, and now I'll turn it back over to Kim to close us out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vashon and Jim. And I hope we all walk away from that conversation maybe thinking more about equitable and livable centers. That's going to do it for this year's annual meeting. But before we go, I hope that you can join me in the chat one more time to congratulate our distinguished Bostonians. Congratulations, Paul, Melvin, and Kate. You truly exemplify the leadership that we need if we are to usher in a renaissance for our region. And of course, we could not have put this program on today without our sponsors. And most specifically, we want to thank our presenting sponsors, State Street, Suffolk, and of course, my friends at Bloomberg. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope everyone stays well, and please get vaccinated. Until next year.